Welcome back. Now, during a weekend of significant military escalation, which has seen Iran's supreme leader killed in joint US and Israeli military strikes, Tehran is vowing what it calls the most devastating offensive in response, whilst President Trump is warning of force never seen before. Well, let's get more on the military and security picture. We can bring in Doron Spielman, who is a former IDF spokesman and New York Times best-selling author. He joins us now from Tel Aviv. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Let me just start by asking you, what is your assessment of why Israel decided to attack right now?
I think that for most of the world, they realize that the Iranian regime is a dictatorial regime that not only has plans to really inflict massive damage on anybody who doesn't follow their viewpoint, which is that of a radical Islamist regime that is taking control of their people. The Israelis, as you know, since June 2025, when we struck their nuclear sites along with their ballistic missile sites, this is because Iran has been constantly not only chanting death to Israel and death to America, they followed it up with force. They shot up more than 500 ballistic missiles, suicide drones at Israel before June 2025. They've been using their proxies for years, Hamas and Hezbollah, the Houthis. They have the blood of thousands of Americans and Israelis on their hands. So I think the question is not why. The question is, what are we going to be doing and what are the goals of the operation?
Right. I mean, diplomacy looked like it was potentially bearing fruit. At least that was the reading we were given of the talks in Geneva. How influential do you think Prime Minister Netanyahu was in shaping President Trump's opinion and steering him away from diplomacy and towards military engagement?
First of all, I don't agree with the premise. The talks that were taking place in Geneva were certainly not bearing fruit. As a matter of fact, it would have been incredibly easy for Iran to avoid this entire conflict. They were given close to 8 months of warning. They were given intense warnings by the President of the United States over the last month. He even talked about it in his State of the Union address. He could not understand why they would not be willing to give up their uranium enrichment. And in fact, in those negotiations, they were not willing to give up the uranium enrichment, which was an absolute red line. They were not willing to dismantle their ballistic missile program. And perhaps most importantly, they are not willing to be held accountable for simply massacring 32,000 of their own people in the streets of Tehran and throughout Iran. And so, can you imagine looking at an arson who burns down his own home, and then he comes to your home and giving them a pack of matches? Nobody would do it in their right mind. And so the Iranians really brought this upon themselves. They were not willing to take the most basic steps. And, I just think it's indicative of this regime having oppressed its people for so long. They would rather have the United States and Israel carry out an attack against their country than making a few concessions and looking for a brighter future, because that really, they are about a radical takeover. It's hard for us to imagine evil in the flesh. They are evil in the flesh. And Ali Khamenei is one last person, but we know that the country, look at the Iranian people. They're standing on the roofs of their buildings and they're yelling out, God bless President Trump, God bless America, God bless Israel. These people are elated. There's a ray of hope. And I think that we should all feel so happy that this is a moment, as difficult as it is, both in Israel and for the Iranian people. This is a moment where we're allowing good, we're helping good really beat evil.
I mean, some people are saying that. Some people in Iran are obviously mourning and they're extremely angry about the death of the supreme leader. Some calling it a red line, saying this could provoke a very strong reaction. Do you think the killing of the supreme leader brings about a swifter end to this conflict?
I think that President Trump is correct in understanding that you have to go after the head of the snake. Iran are the ones that were the head of the octopus with tentacles reaching out to Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, militias in Iraq. I mean, so much death and destruction that they really are the head of the snake for so much terror in the world. And at the head of the snake is Ali Khamenei. And I think that, showing that he is not immune, that he's not able to sit in his, fortified palace or his children in their Lamborghinis and they're all billionaires kind of just sending out orders to faraway regimes to attack America, to attack Israel, and that they are personally accountable. I think that this is probably the most important thing that could happen because these leaders have been living in the lap of luxury by creating terror throughout the world. When they know that they and their ring of evil are going to pay a price, then maybe they're going to think twice besides doing this. I think this gives a real chance for a different wave of leadership who will hopefully have the courage to go into that spot and will be focused on not only their pocketbook and enriching their families, but in the Iranian people.
Okay, Doron, obviously so many key figures have been eliminated within the first 12 hours of this conflict starting. What does that tell us about just how compromised Iran has been from an intel point of view?
Very. Probably this is the most sophisticated intelligence operation, one of them ever carried out in world history. It combined both Israeli intelligence and United States intelligence. And one thing we have to understand, there's two different types of intelligence. One type of intelligence is signal intelligence, intercepting signals, but there's nothing like having people on the ground that give you intelligence. And while I'm not specifically, aware of the specific assets, it's clear that in a regime that is that corrupt, that has been going on for so long, and there's such an outcry in the streets, more and more people were probably willing to provide information about that regime. And that's what happens, if again, it's like Hitler at the end of World War II, the Allies had so much information on him because people would just realize that this is a maniacal leader, we have to bring him down. And I think that's probably why that really aided to the intelligence process here. It's the very people who wanted to bring him down, there's so many that provided that information.
And what do you read into Iran's response so far? I mean, why should GCC countries be on the front line of this conflict?
I think that Iran is kind of like a predator that as it's dying is kind of just shooting at everyone around the entire area. I mean, it's insane. They've struck Saudi Arabia, they've struck everyone in the Middle East. They've struck your own cities and your own capitals all throughout the Middle East. And I think it just really shows, they were ruling by force. And when they see their power slipping, all they can think of at this point is revenge. There's nothing else that it's inexplicable. I mean, they know they're busy trying to destroy Israel. They can't destroy Israel, Kuwait, Bahrain, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar all at once. And so it's just, again, goes back to an ideology of ruling through force. And I think it gives us incredible insight why they were working so hard on creating a nuclear weapon. And again, this is a regime whose people didn't even have access to water, as we know, on a regular basis. The most basic elements, the real had gone up to over 1 million real for $1, and everything was going into an atomic weapon. Why is this? Because we could see that they knew as soon as they became nuclear, they would rule with fear. And now that they're going down, they're lashing out at fear at all the same countries that they were hoping to rule. And I think it's really a blessing that we struck them in June, Israel, and with the help of the United States, but mostly Israel, and now in a joint effort, because at the end of the day, you don't want to wait for evil to metastasize and grow until you cannot stop it. It's grown for long enough.
And just tell us how you think Israeli and Gulf aerial defense systems are holding out. Are they proving to be completely effective?
Definitely not completely. This is the cost of war. We just had, unfortunately, a mass casualty incident here on Israeli soil. While we've been investing so much in developing these systems and sharing them with our neighbors in the Middle East and with European countries, and as incredible as they are, and I think that every time I hear an interception from my own home, it only takes one. And let's remember that Iran is aiming not only for military sites, they're clearly aiming for the middle of civilian centers. And this bomb that landed in Beit Shemesh, the middle of the neighborhood, and the numbers aren't even all out, but it's a massive casualty incident. It's horrific, and it's a direct hit. So there is a really big price to pay here. And the Israeli people, we're on the front line. I mean, we are the ones that are going to pay the price. We feel that the destruction of this regime in Iran is for the entire world. Maybe not everyone agrees with that, but we feel it because we know how evil they are. And we also know that we're the ones on the front lines. But we're willing to pay the price because we think that this is a once in a generation opportunity where you have a U.S. president, President Trump, and Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu who are working together and see this evil and have the courage to really try to bring it down.
What are Iran's other options when it comes to response? I mean, we often hear about closure of the Strait of Hormuz. That's presumably one option on the table. What other options do you see?
I think that Iran could resort to a number of options. First of all, let's not forget that they have been replenishing their ballistic missile arsenal. Ever since June, they've received shipments of ballistic missiles and supplies from China. This has been made very, very public. They've been building them around around the clock. And so each of those ballistic missiles, they have even a heavier payload than what we've seen up till now. And they can wipe out, God forbid, entire city block if one of them lands successfully. And they're continuing to fire them. That's one. The second is, as you mentioned, closing the Straits of Hormuz, which they've already begun doing. They attacked a ship today that was going through international waters. It creates fear, but that's not going to save the regime. Again, it's kind of a last gasp. Well, if you ask me what really what scares me is them turning out massively and trying to slaughter their people again, almost in retribution for what's happening around the world. And I think that both Israel and the United States and people around the world, we're here because we want those people to be able to have a new government, and we need to act quickly and very directly against those commanders. Like you said, much of the command staff was taken out because those are the ones who gave the orders to go and take out those crowds. And the quicker and the more thoroughly this is taken care of, the more that those people in Iran will be able to live a life of safety in a new future. We'll see less missiles in Israel, less missiles around the Middle East.
You didn't mention the proxies of Iran, like Hezbollah, the Iraqi militia groups, the Houthis. Do you see them having a role in Iran's response?
It's interesting. We have not seen much, as you know, since now Hezbollah has not entered the foray at all, which is very, very interesting because Iran was really pressing them to enter. And it could be, again, I want to say this incredibly hesitantly, but maybe they realize that their financier and the people who've been controlling them are done, and maybe they're considering taking a different route. It would be nice. That's one of the advantages of taking out the head of the snake. Maybe the other snakes who've been funded and blinded by that money for so long are actually willing to move away from decades and decades of war towards a better future. However, Israel is on enormous guard against Hezbollah joining this foray and the other militias, and including Hamas. In Judea and Samaria and in Gaza, there was a massive call up of Israeli troops. More than 70,000 reservists were called up, and almost all of them are in Judea and Samaria, and making sure that, because we saw certain Hamas members cheering in Nablus. It's absurd. Every time a Iranian missile lands over their heads or in their own cities, they're cheering as if to support Iran. It's not all of them. It's not all the Arabs in Israel by any means, by the way. But we have to be very careful that they don't join the foray. And so I'm hoping that they're going to look towards a better future and look towards the West and help Western values really enter into the Middle East. It's just would be a very good thing.
You might not have the details, but I'm going to ask you anyway. I mean, Israel did bomb an elementary school in southern Iran yesterday, and according to Iranian officials, at least 148 people were killed, many of them schoolgirls, I gather. What's your understanding of how that happened? And are you concerned something like that could create a major backlash, from people who otherwise would have supported Israel and the United States in doing what they're doing in Iran?
First of all, I think that we have to say that it's not about the optics. I do not want a girls' school or civilians to die, and neither does President Trump, and neither does the Israeli army. We're not looking to carry this out against civilians. We're looking to target the leadership. Unfortunately, this is war. A lot of it's being carried out from 10,000, 20,000 feet in the air. And one of the unfortunate things about war are civilians are unfortunately often killed in war, which is why we want to be very hesitant and very clear in carrying out a war. And that is the most important thing. It's not about the optics, and it's not about people, losing support for the war. I think that the President of the United States and Israel both did this without the permission of the international community. We did this because we see evil that is not only producing weapons, but is willing to use them. As I mentioned, we just saw with the ballistic missile, one of thousands that has landed in Israel over the last year and a half. We've seen the terror of Iran take place. And when you see the intent of evil and the willingness to use evil, you need to strike. And so I think we're very clear on our goals, but we are all trying to minimize civilian casualties. But I want to say again, war is a very messy enterprise, which is why this was done with really a lot of reservations, and which is why the president, I think, spent 2-3 months trying to do negotiations. And by Iran walking away from those negotiations, it just shows they don't really care about their people. We probably care about them more. And if that is true, of course, it's tragic.
And just lastly, Doron, what sort of a time frame do you think we're looking at here before we see any signs of potential resolution to this crisis?
I think that the people who are looking most closely at this are the people that are around the leadership positions. They're looking, is this a serious operation where the United States and Israel are going to go in and take down this regime and allow the Iranian people to take back this regime? Or are we going to stay in for a short period of time, carry out some important work, and leave? Because if we leave, no one is going to go into those leadership positions. They don't want to be stuck in the ring when Israel and the US pull out and they're left to face retribution from all the old cronies and their children who are going to come back. And so I think we need to understand war of this importance, of replacing a regime that has been really digging in roots for dozens of years, is going to take time. We need to show a lot of fortitude. The longer we stay in this, more thorough we are with dismantling the nuclear program and destroying it, dismantling and destroying the ballistic program, and allowing the Iranian people to take back their government. The longer we stick with this, the greater chance we have for a new Middle East. And this is a chance for an entire new Middle East. That's what's on the horizon.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Doron Spielman, former IDF spokesperson and New York Times bestselling author. Thank you for your time.